You've triple checked your bags, made it to the airport early, and even scored the window seat. But then, ding, your flight is delayed. Whether it's 30 minutes or overnight, flight delays can throw your entire travel plan into chaos. But here's the good news: you have more control than you think. In this episode of Wander and Chat, we're diving into the real reasons flights get delayed and what you can actually do about it. From insider tips to keep your family sane, to how to get rebooked faster than the guy next to you, we've got you covered. So, first off, we are going to talk about recent travel. If you've been listening, you know that we have both come back from some cruises. Anna, tell us about this Alaska cruise. I know you love Alaska.
I
How was
do.
this most recent one? Did it match up to the other ones?
It does. And every single time I talk about Alaska, I say the same thing. It is a different trip every time you go. Will you see more wildlife sometimes than others? You absolutely will. But there's just a really, I don't want to call it majestic because it's so cliche, but it is. It's just such a majestic beauty. And when you're standing there in front of these glaciers, it's just amazing. I even had, because the day that we did Glacier Bay, we stayed in our stateroom so that we could see everything. And the captain was going to do a 360-degree turn so that everybody on the ship could get a really good view of the glacier. So we ordered lunch to our stateroom, and the gentleman that delivered our lunch, it was his first cruise. He had never been to Alaska before, and you could see that he's kind of looking out the window. And
Yeah.
I said, "Do you have to be anywhere for the next minute or two? Go out on the balcony and take the pictures." And there was literal tears. I mean, he was so excited to see this. And I think it's a whole new appreciation because I have been to Alaska many times. And as much as I love it, just to see him see the glacier for the first time, I mean, it's very emotional. It really is. And, I cannot recommend enough that if you have an opportunity to go to Alaska, go sooner rather than later. There's just stuff going on globally that it alters the landscape there, alters the images that you'll be able to capture. And this is some stuff that you really do want to share with your kids and grandkids.
Yeah, and that's probably why you keep going back, right?
I mean, it absolutely is. Plus, it's just a nice cruise. And this one we did 11 nights, so we came up the West Coast to Alaska. But it doesn't matter whether you do a round trip Seattle, whether you do a northbound or a southbound. There's just so much to see, and it's just unspeakably beautiful. You just can't find words to capture how gorgeous it is.
And there's something, I'm not sure, maybe you know, like there's something that you can't just go from a US destination to a US destination, right? Like you have to stop in Canada.
Yeah, so cruising has what they call open loop cruises and closed loop cruises. And in order for the cruise line to fit in this Jones Act, which is what regulates,
Hmm.
um, you have to stop in a foreign port. So on Alaska cruises, they all stop in Canada, whether you stop in Vancouver or start in Vancouver, whether you go to
Hmm.
Victoria, they all have to do a visit in Canada. The good thing about that is because this is still a closed loop cruise, which means it starts at the same port, ends at the same port for the most part, unless you're doing a northbound or southbound, you can still board the ship without needing a passport, which is really important. So, yeah, if you're doing a cruise to Alaska, you are probably going to stop in Canada. Now, they stop in Vancouver, they stop in Victoria, but you don't need a passport for the most part because you usually start and stop in the same port, and that eliminates the requirement for a passport. You can just bring photo ID and a birth certificate. I highly recommend a passport anyway. And there are excursions. For example, if you're going to do the White Plains Railroad, or it's White Plains, White Star, Jim will correct me, or he'll correct me on. Yes, I know the White Star is a Titanic, but White Plains didn't sound right to me. Okay, what's the name of White Pass? White Pass Railroad. I did know. Okay, go away, Jim. You're distracting. Okay, for the fifth time. Yeah, so most of the cruises to Canada, or Jesus Christ, most of the cruises to Alaska do stop in some port in Canada. And that really eliminates the need for a passport, even though you should still have a passport. And I will say this, that even if you start and stop in the same port, which means you don't need to bring your passport, there are some excursions that require a passport. There is a bus trip and there is a railroad, the White Pass Railroad, that goes from Alaska into the Yukon Territory in Canada. And in order for you to go into the Yukon Territory, you have to have a passport. So when you're looking at excursions, if you've decided to just do your birth certificate or whatever, you have to keep in mind that you're not going to be able to do any of those excursions that take you up to the Yukon Territory.
Right. And as always, that's something you check with your cruise line anyway to see what's required at the time, since those requirements
Absolutely.
can change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, if you're doing the excursion on your own, if you're getting off the ship and just going to the train station, they will tell you, you can only do these trips if you don't have your
Right.
passport.
Right.
So, yeah. But let's get right into our topic of the day, which is dealing with flight delays. Not that we have any experience with that
No.
at all.
So, I mean, we've both had numerous experiences, right? So, and I could tell you a ton, but the worst one I had was I was on I was in San Antonio. I was flying to Charlotte and then to Boston, and I was on US Air, which is now has been absorbed into American. And we were on the plane and we were seated. I was actually having a lovely conversation with the gentleman next to me, and there was mechanical failure. So they had us get off the plane. We stayed at the gate for a while. This literally went on all day till the point where we now knew we were going to miss our connections. And, Charlotte's a big hub. It was a big hub for US Air. So um, they had told us they were going to rebook us. At this point, we were well into the late in the day. I think it was like maybe 4 p.m. We were supposed to leave at like 9. Um, and they had us uh, get a voucher for a hotel. So we did that, and we went to the hotel, which was a Drury Inn, which I had never
Hmm.
stayed at before. But those are great hotels because they have like an evening reception that's literally dinner and, a nice breakfast. So we all did that. We all kind of, it was just our group basically eating dinner together because the hotel was quiet. We went back the next day. The plane that was like our same flight, but the next day left. We were still there. And then they told us that they had fixed the plane overnight. And when the pilot, like when they went to go get it, it was still not working.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it ended up being, I want to say like 36 hours delayed.
Oh my gosh.
And the whole time I'm thinking, like, I have to be able to get, like, I have a connecting flight, right? I should be able to get to Charlotte or any other, like, just get me out of here.
Yeah.
But they just literally couldn't. So, yeah, that was a nightmare. I think they offered the Drury. They didn't offer any food, and they offered, I want to say like $200. It was really, really, really low, like
Oh.
really low. $200 on an airline that we knew was not going to be in existence in like 8 months. So yeah, nightmare.
Yeah, and there are nightmare stories. I mean, I have infamously, even on our podcast, talked about my Miami flight. It should be less than a 3-hour flight for me from Philadelphia to Miami. And this particular one was 11 hours, primarily due to weather in Miami.
Right,
But the
right.
weather phenomenon that occurred in Miami was such a brief incident,
Yeah,
but the way it backed up all of the flights, our flight got pushed so far back. And part of the reason that our flight got pushed so far back is because we had to stop for fuel. And once we were safely on the ground, Miami decided to let flights that were still actively in the air land first. Now,
including
this was
mine.
yeah, like yours. Now, even though this was a weather delay, this was on a Frontier Airlines plane, and they did, at about the 4-hour mark, offer everybody a $15 credit to use to buy something to eat or something to drink. But part of the problem with that is they didn't tell us how long we were going to be waiting.
Right, right,
And
right.
people felt like they were trapped there. Like, I don't want to get up and leave because they've said once we get the okay to board the flight, it's like right now we're boarding
Right,
this
right.
flight. So nobody wanted to go anywhere. And there were even people waiting at the gate who were Googling, and I admit I was one of them, who were Googling the Brightline train because
Right.
they figured if we're going to be sitting here for 4 or 5 more hours, we can get on the Brightline and be down there in 2 hours.
Right.
But you just didn't know, like, should I book the Brightline and get down there? Except now I'm in Orlando stopped and it's literally a 20-minute flight. So if I
Right.
go and do that, I might end up still getting in later than I anticipated. So yeah, flight delays are just a
And
pain.
you would have had to
So
pay for the
unpredictable.
Brightline separately.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You would have had, because it was a flight delay, you weren't getting any real compensation from the airline
Right.
because it was weather related. They couldn't
Right.
do anything. It wasn't
Right.
their fault. And they were very generous in offering, the money for lunch or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, it was very nice. But yeah, it's super, super frustrating. So why do they happen? What are the typical reasons you're going to experience a flight delay?
So we just talked about two, right? Mechanical failure and weather. Weather's the most common. Sometimes there's issues with crew. I've been on a flight, one of those like little regional flights where the flight attendant didn't show up.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and there's only one flight attendant on those. So that's, there's a delay there. Sometimes, the crew runs into timing issues where that, there's only so many hours they can work. Um, I've had flight delays, or my husband had flight delays because uh, similar sort of thing, but the crew timed out because there was a uh, medical emergency that the plane had to stop, um, which also requires refueling, as you mentioned. Um, Sometimes there's residual effects from other delays. So there's some delay somewhere else, and now that has thrown everything off. Um, and then there's air traffic control delays, meaning that air traffic control, for whatever reason, has decided to slow down or stop travel into a specific airport.
Yeah, we have been at Philly Airport where we've had to wait for them to de-ice a plane.
Right.
And it's super nerve-wracking, even if you don't have a connecting flight. Like you're watching them out the window and you're just hoping, are they going to get this plane off the ground so that I can go?
Yeah.
But you just can't predict some of these delays.
Yeah. And I mean, one time, in Boston, obviously, like where you are, we do have de-icing delays. Um, we had one where they de-iced the plane and then we were stuck there because
Oh
everything else was backed up and they had to de-ice it again.
my
So,
gosh.
um, so yeah, that's definitely something that can cause delays too.
And is there anything you can do to control a delay? I know I felt very empowered at the beginning of this, but what can we do?
So we can't necessarily control a delay, right? We can't force the plane to go. What we can do is just be a little cognizant of like what can happen. So, being in a cold weather climate, I know that de-icing, which doesn't happen every time in the winter, it's not an everyday thing, but it is common. Um, and then, storms, those delays, you're gonna understand that it's likely or possible that they would happen. So in that case, what you want to do is try not to book um, flights that have a very short connection time, right? If you're going
Mhm.
to connect. Um, I find that flying in the morning is typically better because you don't get that residual effect of all the flights that, you know, are delayed throughout the day. The morning too, I've often seen in Boston where I'm able to get out as one of the last planes before a storm gets bad. So morning is definitely good. Um, and then again, back to layovers, it's hard because you don't want to be at a layover airport for a really long time. But just keep in mind, I mean, I have run to planes connecting. Um, it's not always easy. You can't control getting off the plane. You can't control how far apart the gates are. Some of these airports, you might have the flight next gate over, or you might have to take a tram or a long walk. So yeah, just be aware of what season. Now, mechanical failures, you're not going to be able to control that. That is not. But again, having a good amount of buffer can be helpful when there are mechanical issues.
Yeah, I like morning flights because I think in my head, I think if something happens to my flight, I have all day to
Right,
maybe
right.
get
That's
on
true.
another
True.
plane. Whereas if I wait until the end of the day, and I'm the last plane out, I'm kind of stuck.
Right. Right.
So what do you do to monitor delays? And you are the queen of this because I have been on a plane and had you text me, "Oh, your flight is delayed." Like, what? How does she know that? And yes, of course I am. Before the airline ever notifies me.
Yeah, and so while I was on my flight going to Miami when you were on your delayed flight, and I was going to the restroom when I got an alert through one of my apps that there was a ground stop in Miami. And so I talked to the flight attendants and I said, "Oh, ground stop?" And they were like, "What ground stop? We didn't know there was a ground stop." So I use two paid apps. A lot of people wonder if you need to pay for them. Some of them have free services, but if you fly frequently, you will find that these are totally worthwhile. What I use is TripIt, which is you can forward your confirmation and it organizes everything really neatly and it sends alerts. It'll send you alerts when there's ground stops, when you arrive and tell you the baggage. It'll tell you when it's delayed. Again, frequently faster than someone else knows,
Mhm.
faster than the airport will announce it. Um, I also use an app called Flighty, and that will actually show the plane in the air, which if you've got Wi-Fi, you can see your plane, which you can do on the screen. But also like, if you have someone picking you up or you're meeting someone, they can also track your flight. And that app is really cool because it'll give you all the information about your flight. Like it'll tell you where it's coming from. So, your flight's coming from Syracuse and then it's landing in Boston and then it's going to Jamaica. Like you can actually see, it'll give you the tail number. It tells you when planes switch. So that was another thing, right? You were on a plane and I said, your plane is, you're switching aircraft. And you were like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. You knew more than the airline did.
I knew you were on board, and then I got an alert that your gate changed, and so I was like, the only way the gate changed is if, like, the aircraft changed, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I love having this information, and what this information does, besides be interesting, right, is, like, if you know that information about a delay before other people know about it, you have more time to react. So if you know there's a delay and now you're going to miss your connection, you can go up to the gate agent or you can call that toll-free number and get yourself before things start really backing up, right? Because the minute they announce that flight delay, everybody is going to go and charge the gate. So having that information is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a super important detail because you can monitor the delays through your airline. The airline will send you a text message
Right,
that says your
right,
flight is delayed or your gate is changing or whatever. But Jim and I have we've been on our way to Florida and had something happen. And by the time the airline notifies you, there's 30 people standing in
right,
line at the
right,
gate trying to talk to the agent to move flights. And I
right.
just had my daughter's girlfriend, she had a flight cancel on her last summer, and literally by the time she got notified, and she had gone to grab something to eat, so she was even farther than the gate. But by the time she got back to the gate, she was like 50th in line. And there were no seats on another plane available for her by the time she got up to the gate agent. So even just a few minutes of notification before everybody gets it could be really make or break for your trip.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned a good point, right? Like you do want to download the airlines app because sometimes um, your flight will have automatically changed. So, the thing with delays is often like sometimes you'll have a connection, but your connection is also delayed, right? Especially if there's like these big storms that kind of are like, take out the East Coast. Um, it it can, if you're flying somewhere not too far, sometimes that one gets delayed. So, yeah, it is definitely helpful to have that information, but I do find that these other apps provide the information quicker.
Yeah. So this next question that I have for you, if this is all the rage. If this was a color, everybody would be wearing it. But every time I turn the television on, and maybe because I live not far from Newark Airport, we live in a very airport heavy area. But what are air traffic control delays? I'm hearing it all the time now, and I don't know that I know what it is.
So, an air traffic control delay is different from weather. It can be related to weather, but it is different from weather. So, this is when air traffic control specifically says we have slowed down. Um, traffic to this airport or we have halted traffic to this airport. Sometimes it's weather related. Sometimes it's because there's too much congestion
Mhm.
in the area. So when you hear something like a ground stop, a ground delay, air traffic control is the one who's saying that. It is, a ground stop will affect any airline that is going to that airport. Um, but the thing about air traffic control delays that's important to know is that those are subject to change at any time. So sometimes you'll see, especially if you use the apps, you'll see pulled back, which means that it was delayed and it's been pulled back. The delay has been pulled back, meaning you're no longer delayed
Mhm.
or you're delayed less. So if you're on an air traffic control delay, it's not a guarantee that you are delayed, meaning you still need to get to the airport. You still need to be really close to the gate. They could change it. And so, you don't want to be that person that's sitting in TGI Fridays in the other, the other terminal,
Yeah.
literally eating your food while everybody else is boarding your flight. Um,
Yeah.
so, you need to be aware of those delays. Typically, when there's an air traffic control delay, the plane is sitting there, the crew is sitting there, they are ready to go. All they need is the go ahead. Um, so that's important to know.
I like that explanation because I think when people hear air traffic control delays, it makes it feel like a much scarier thing, like, "Oh, this is big. This is not just a thunderstorm. There's something big going on," but it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Right, right, right. And
And
sometimes,
how do you prepare if there's a delay? Like, do you go to the airport expecting, like, what do you take with you? What do you do?
so you never know, right? Like we've talked about, if there's weather issues, maybe you're a little more prepared, but you can't prepare for a mechanical issue. You can't prepare for, uh, you know, a pop up thunderstorm in Miami that we talked to people in Miami who were like, It rained? Like
Yeah.
it was really just a small, small thing. So, what you want to do is, especially if you're traveling with kids, you want to be prepared, right? And so, this means you need to have things in your carry on baggage that will like entertain your kids in the short term. So, things like coloring books, crayons, things that they can kind of sit and do. Little snacks are great, especially if you are on like an air traffic control or an ATC delay where you don't want to go far to get food. Um, also, you wanna have, like, your chargers and you wanna be able to, because you never know how long you're gonna be there and your device might run out of power. Your portable chargers, which now we know need to go in your carry-on bags anyway and always should have, your power cords, things like that. You wanna have any medication, that you're gonna need. So, you just kind of be prepared with things. Um and not crazy amounts of things to carry, but just, so that you are, um, ready.
Yeah, we used to have, a time limit with our girls in terms of electronic devices, but if there was an airline delay, that went right out the window, whether it's a
Yeah.
10-minute delay or a 10-hour delay, here's your iPad, your whatever, use all the devices so that you have
Yeah.
something to do.
And you don't want that thing to run out of power, so you wanna make sure you have all the cords.
Exactly. So we've talked a little bit about this, but does the airline compensate you or do you get a hotel? Like, what will they give you?
So it depends, right? For weather, like your situation, there is, you know, limited compensation you're gonna get. They are not responsible for weather. And you got a voucher for food, which was probably more than they needed to do. Um, so if you are delayed because of weather and you stay in a hotel, that's going to be on you typically. Um, I mean, almost certainly. Food while you're delayed, typically on you. If it's a mechanical issue, there might be a little bit more that the airline will offer. Like I mentioned in my situation, they did put us up in a hotel. It was a hotel with meals. They didn't give us meals, but I don't know if they would have given us meals otherwise. I suspect they probably would have. They'll often give you transportation to that hotel if there isn't like a shuttle. This hotel had a shuttle because they're going to try to put you up in an airport hotel. Um, they're not going to put you up in, the Ritz in Boston, right? You're going to be in a very practical hotel near the airport. Um, but you'll have a comfortable, safe place to stay. Um, but this is a good time to talk about having travel insurance or credit card insurance on your on your trip, if you booked it with a credit card, sometimes there's some sort of compensation you can get. You should be aware of that. And this is when travel insurance can kick in. So, you should know about what your options are before you
Yeah, for
take
sure.
that
And,
flight.
I talk to a lot of people who think that when you buy travel insurance, you're buying it for like just the cruise or, just the all inclusive and it doesn't include anything else. But aside from the fact that if you've bought travel insurance for your cruise, you are covered for your flights and everything else, you can buy an annual travel insurance policy that will cover you for the entire year for whatever trips you make. If you
Mhm.
get a flat tire and you lose a night at a hotel or you have one of these airline delays that they're not going to give you anything for. So, highly recommend travel insurance.
Yeah. And knowing what you have for coverage, because what you don't want is to be, on your device, like hectic scrolling to see if there's like a dollar limit or how you go about booking that hotel if you do it yourself. Um, you know, if you do have insurance and some sort of coverage, you're going to want to save all those receipts because, especially if it's like at the beginning of your trip, you might even forget. But, tuck them away somewhere safe so that you can then go about getting reimbursed.
Okay, so now the flight delay is announced. You've got all the information. What do you do? What's your next step?
So it's going to depend on how long the delay is and what type of delay it is. Um, if it's something that's going to affect your travel, like now, um, you're going to miss your connection. Uh, Now, keep in mind, if there is a storm, like say in Boston, and the storm's in Boston and my flight's delayed, every other airline is going to have a delayed flight, right? So your options are fairly limited. Um, but what you're going to want to do is take the time to talk to a rep at the airport. What I always do is I will pick up my phone and call the toll free number too. So
Hmm.
I kind of see like what's quicker. Um, and explain like I have this connection. Um, what you don't, saying like, oh well, I have dinner plans tonight is not
Right.
really right. That's not. But if you have a connection, like they're responsible for getting you to your ultimate destination, and sometimes they can reroute you in a different way. So they're the best place to go um, for those delays. But yeah, as soon as you hear about the delay, and this is like I said, where having those apps is really helpful because you just have more time to react. Um, and calling too, sometimes that can just be easier because it's a national call center. Um, if it's
That was a good
weather,
little sneaky tip, though, that you threw in there. Like, don't make the reservation at the Applebee's too close to when your flight lands,
right, right, that's
just in
very
case.
true. I always kind of say, maybe I hope I'm not delayed, right? Like you always hope you're not. Um, but yeah, if you're going to Disney World, you're not going to plan that like hard to get dinner at Cinderella Castle the night you arrive, right? That's just a bad idea. Because there, as we've mentioned, a ton of reasons for delays. We like to think they're not going to happen. More, I fly all the time. You fly all the time. Most of the time, I get to my destination on time or even early. But, it's these times that you are delayed significantly that you really realize like this can really, throw a damper in your first day.
Yeah, for sure. So what can you do if the delay is been announced? Like, are you chained to the chair there? You can't go anywhere. What are your options?
So again, this depends. If it's an air traffic control delay, they're going to want you to stay very nearby. If it's a mechanical delay, typically they'll explain it to you. Um, you know, with mechanical delays, I always find like I want information, but like I don't want that much information, right? So like this particular flight delay that I was mentioning, like she was like, "We're waiting to see if the glue sticks," and I was like, "I don't need to know that. I don't want to know about the glue. We're waiting for a specific type of screw. Like I don't need that information." Keep in
Yeah.
mind too, mechanical delays are not always like you think like, "Oh no, the engine's not working," but sometimes like we had a delay once because like the door that the luggage went into, like, wasn't clicking locked or that, like, conveyor belt wasn't working. So sometimes it's, like, something fairly, you know, unimportant to the actual function of the aircraft.
Yeah, I had a delay because the air conditioning wasn't working.
Yeah, yeah. Just, keep that in mind. So like I said, I want information, but I don't want that much information. But when they do tell you like there's a mechanical issue, I've been in the Caribbean where they've said like we've had to fly a part in from Nassau. Now we know. That's going to take some time. So now I can go have my dinner. Um Keeping in mind that all of a sudden they may decide to take a plane out of service from a different, so not too crazy. But if it's a long delay, and like I've had a situation where I was going, uh, I was in San Diego, I was flying to Boston. It was a complete freak snowstorm in Boston in October. We typically never get those, but we did, and I had come from, uh, I think it was like um, Carlsbad, so I'd come down to San Diego, so that was like a bit of a drive. I had just gotten through security when they announced that that flight was canceled. When the flight is canceled, it's canceled. And they had put me on a flight, a red eye that night, but like this is at 10 a.m., right? And so when that happens, there's a couple of things you can do. You can just hang out in the airport. But what I did was I actually went to like the little customer service desk and I said, "What do I do? I have a
Mm,
bag, right? Can't just go walking around San Diego." And they led me to a nearby hotel that had a day stay that you could book.
nice.
So I think I paid like maybe $100. Um, I got access to their pool. I had a room with a balcony. Um, I had a friend in San Diego. I called. She met me for dinner. I knew I was taking a red eye, and I don't sleep well on those, so I took like a really long, nice nap in this comfortable room. And I knew I was going back to snow. So being able to take advantage of the weather for the day was
Yeah,
wonderful.
that's
Um,
nice.
you can do this, you know, basically at any airport. If there is a hotel airport, like in Orlando, for instance, I've done a day stay at the Hyatt
Hmm.
in Orlando. You get access to their rooftop pool and to the fitness center and the restaurants, and so that's a great option. If you are delayed for a long time.
This is a question, and it's coming a little bit out of left field because we didn't talk about it. But if you have a delay like this, and it's going to be hours, can you leave the airport?
You can leave the airport. There are, certain things like I've had delays where they've had me take my luggage. Um, I had a delay in Grand Cayman. I think that was the one where they had to like fly the part in. And they told us, like, if you've been to the Grand Cayman airport, it's very, very small. They basically told us, like, you can't stay here because we don't have room for you.
Yeah.
Um, so in that case, and this was the craziest coincidence, I checked out of my hotel in the morning and they told me their systems were down and they couldn't check me out. And so they were like, we're going to check everybody out as soon as the systems are up and we'll send you your receipt. So I just went back and I was like, I haven't checked out yet, right? And they were like, no, you haven't. So, I mean, that never happens, right? So typically you wouldn't be able to go back to your hotel after you've checked out. Um, but yeah, sometimes if you don't know, ask. Can I
Yeah,
leave?
that's a great
Do
idea.
I need to take my luggage? Is it gonna be automatically, you know sometimes they won't let you take your luggage, right? So, yeah, in the case of Grand Cayman, like, it was already loaded. So they were like, "You can't you can leave, but you can't take your
Yeah,
luggage."
that's a whole different complication.
Yeah.
We've given some great information about what to do during a flight delay. And if you've experienced a nightmare flight delay, we absolutely want to hear about it. So drop us a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast while you're doing a review, by the way, of the podcast. We'd love that. But also, we have a Facebook group for Wander and Chat. So go find us there, join the group, and let's get a chat going about what your nightmare delays are like and what you do. What do you bring with you to be prepared?
Mail call, question stories, let's hear it all. From you to us, it's Wonder and Chat. So grab a seat, let's talk just like that.
We've got a couple questions from previous episodes that somebody needs answers to. I know I need answers. Have you ever tried a day stay at a resort instead of a shore excursion? And I know you have, Jody. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so obviously, with all the caveats we mentioned from the last episode, right? You don't want to book something that you're going to be worried about getting back to the port. And also, I just want to say when I did this, I was well aware of the fact that I could lose my money because I was giving it directly to the hotel and not to the cruise line. So, and I did this in probably one of the more risky situations. I did it in a tender port,
Oh my
which,
gosh.
so that was always obviously part of it, right? So what I did was it was Grand Cayman. I had stayed there before. I loved the hotel. I reached out to them and I asked them if they offered day stays, and they did. So I booked it, and this was not on their website, just to be clear. Um, but I booked it. We got to the port, we found a cab, we went to the hotel, we got a room, we got key cards, we had charging privileges, we were able to get towels, we had access to the beach, to the pool. We decided to eat, at their restaurant
Mhm.
right at the beach. Um, spent the whole day, jumped in the shower, got ready, took the cab back with plenty of time, plenty of time. Did some shopping at the port, and it had a great day. No stress of not sure where the beach was or any of that stuff. We had everything at our fingertips. Um, there are also some websites that will help you book these type of things. Um, some day stay websites, so those can be very helpful too.
Yeah, and that also lets you do things on your own time. You're not in that bubble of an excursion, but also you're not in the restrictions of the excursion. Like you've got to be ready to
Right.
get off the ship at
Right.
8 o'clock and you got to be ready to get back on the bus at 3 o'clock. What if I don't want to spend that long on the beach kind of a
Right.
thing? So
Right.
yeah.
And we had a
And
room. So if somebody was tired or, wanted to just get out of the sun for a little bit, we did have a room.
yeah. And what do you bring on a shore excursion? What do you have to take with you?
So obviously you're going to want to look at the description of the shore excursion. Sometimes they'll recommend that you bring a towel, or that you bring, it's you're going to need certain types of shoes depending on the excursion. Um, Typically, what I'll bring is some cash for tipping, because usually you'll tip these um, excursion guides separately. I will bring my cell phone, my ID, sunscreen, also my cruise ID to get back on the cruise ship. Um, so that stuff plus, if it's just going to be a general excursion, you're going to want like comfortable shoes. And, you always pack like a little bag that you can kind of put this stuff in. So you're not going to want to walk around with like your carry-on bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also want to pay attention very closely to the things you can't bring on your shore excursion because
Right.
I know you've seen them too. People they run up to the buffet and grab their breakfast and now they're trying to
Right.
get
Right.
off of the ship with an apple or a banana or something,
Right.
which
Right.
is a big no-no for a lot of foreign destinations.
Right, right. So in news, kind of going along with all of the airport information we talked about, um, there was an article I read about TSA warning smartphone users. And what they were essentially saying is that you shouldn't plug your smartphone into a USB port. So, you see those USB ports all the time. Um, you know, Bring your TSA compliant power brick or a portable charger. So, I mean, I always recommend portable chargers anyway, because you don't necessarily even know if you're going to have access to a USB port or a plug in the airport. Some of them have tons of power cords and outlets. I mean, outlets, not cords, uh, but a lot of them don't, and you don't have access to them. So, um, they also mentioned about public Wi-Fi, and this isn't really a new thing necessarily, but it's just something to keep in mind as we are doing our, banking and all that stuff on our apps, is that, you don't want to necessarily be putting sensitive information into your phone or your device while you're on public Wi-Fi. So it's just a reminder. This isn't necessarily anything new, but it's just a recent reminder, and it's kind of a good thing to talk about as we're talking about like being stuck in an airport.
Yeah, that's It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's also a really good reminder because who doesn't before or after a vacation, you're checking your bank statement, making sure that everything
Right.
got applied correctly or whatever. And there is a safety factor.
Right. Right. Yeah. You don't want to be like logging into those financial services websites from a public Wi-Fi.
And this little bit of news kind of previews our next episode. Big news coming out of Disney about something we're all anticipating.
Yeah, there's so many exciting things going on at Disney, and we are talking about it in our next episode. But the thing we just wanted to mention here is that there is a new Cars Land going into the Magic Kingdom. It is sounds like it's going to be part or an extension of Frontierland, but it is Piston Peak National Park.
I
So
love
I am super excited for that. I think it's fun that they're doing something different than they did in California. Uh, but keeping with the Cars theme, it's been super popular at California Adventure. So I'm excited to see how that comes about in the Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it too. Well, we thank you for joining us here today on our podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you are listening to us. And if you could, just leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's something you'd like to see covered on a future episode, because we're happy to look at your ideas and maybe we can do a whole episode around them. And our next episode, talking about Disney, there's so much new going on at Walt Disney World, and we are going to wade through everything and have a nice little chat about all of the things that are brand new and upcoming that you don't want to miss.